Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you might be joining us from. Thank you for joining this webinar on raising ambition on SDG7, leveraging energy compacts for updated NDCs. As colleagues are trickling in, I just want to start off by saying that on behalf of UNDP and SEforALL, we're very excited to be hosting this webinar today. My name is Chibulu Luo. I am the Global Energy and Climate Change Advisor with UNDP's Climate Hub and Sustainable Energy Hub. And also, so while we're having people come in, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, specifically letting us know where you're joining us from, what country, what city, and also your organization or your affiliation. Also allow me to maybe provide some context about this webinar. This webinar is really about reflecting and taking stock of the opportunity that third generation NDCs mean for the SDG goals and priorities. As many of you know, as countries prepare to submit the their third generation NDCs in the coming months, ensuring more ambitious energy sector actions that are specifically aligned with the SDG7 priorities will be critical to this process. And so we do have a very busy agenda, but, and we also, welcome quite an interactive engagement from your part in terms of engaging on the chat and also during the panel discussion that we will have. We will have quite an interesting and distinguished set of panelists who will also provide us some country-specific and regional-specific examples of how countries are advancing the energy-related actions within their NDCs, and also including mechanisms and approaches for bringing in finance into the sector. And so before we get started officially, let me also now turn to my colleague, Sarah, to provide some important logistical information and also information on the interpretation functionalities in Zoom. Over to you, Sarah.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I am going to share my screen briefly and hope that it shows up. Can everyone see my screen correctly? I think so.
No.
No?
Not yet.
How about that? No? Okay.
No.
I don't know why. Okay, hold on one second. Apologies.
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I don't know why that didn't work as well. So let me swap this view and speak quickly about this. So we're pleased to offer interpretation for this session. So the session will be simultaneously interpreted in Spanish and French. And if you would like to listen to the webinar in a language other than the default language of English, please follow the instructions on this screen. At the bottom of the Zoom window, you can click on the icon that looks like a globe to access interpretation settings. And then once you click on the interpretation icon, a pop-up window will appear showing the available languages for interpretation. You can then select your preferred language from the list and will be able to hear the interpretation clearly. You can then also mute the original audio to avoid any overlapping sound by clicking on the mute original audio button. If you have any questions related to interpretation or issues on that, please feel free to chat about that and we will try to help you as quickly as possible. And then just a quick note on housekeeping. Please use the chat function throughout the session to share your comments, resources, or engage with other participants. But if you have a specific question for the speakers, we encourage you to use the Q&A function because we will be answering questions through that rather than through live questions from the audience. So we will answer those questions live, but only if they're in the chat. And then all presentation materials from the session, including the PowerPoint and highlighted resources, will be shared by email following the event. And please note that we are recording this for future reference, and it will be shared on the NDC Partnership YouTube channel. So by participating in this session, you consent to being recorded, although your video and audio will not be available, so there will be none of that available. But thank you so much for your attention. We're excited to have you join us today, and I will hand it back over to Lulu. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sarah. So let's get started. So let me start off by taking everyone back to a time of the high-level dialogue on energy that was convened under the leadership of the Secretary General. The dialogue brought together country governments and global leaders to lay out bold ambitions to achieving universal energy access and a net zero energy transition. And these are the targets that are enshrined in SDG7. These discussions also focused on the importance of closing the energy access gap because, the reality is we cannot have an energy transition without addressing the issues of energy access and the significant deficits that exist globally, and limiting climate change through the scale up of affordable renewable energy. And this was also a clear signal in the opening remarks of the Secretary General, where he also highlighted the economic opportunities that can stem from investing in renewable energy. And so the roadmap that was adopted because of the high-level dialogue was to articulate a clear pathway to achieve SDG7 and support the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement, and laid out some critical actions and milestones to 2025 and 2030. These included addressing the energy access gap. The latest data on SDG7 tells us that 685 million people do not have access to electricity and 2.1 billion do not have access to clean cooking. And so we really need to address these gaps and close those gaps by 2030. It also lays out a plan for transitioning to a decarbonized energy system and mobilizing adequate and predictable finance. And so today, 3 years after the dialogue was convened, these milestones are also very much aligned with the priorities that stemmed from the global stocktake decisions of COP28. As many of you know, the tripling of renewable energy capacity globally by 2030, doubling the rate of energy efficiency improvements, and also phasing out unabated coal power. And so to ensure that countries actually realize these actions on the ground, the dialogue initiated a process to support countries to pledge their commitments through energy compacts. Energy compacts, which you will hear about today, are voluntary, trackable commitments that are, designed to spur action towards achieving SDG7 and a net zero energy transition. And in many ways, energy compacts can offer an important starting framework for countries to consider when updating their energy targets within NDCs. And so in this context, UNDP is leveraging the infrastructure of the Climate Promise, our global support to countries on NDCs, to lead a coordinated and UN system-wide effort on NDCs. There is already extensive ongoing UN system support to developing countries on climate change, and this will all be brought together and mobilized in this coordinated effort of the Climate Promise 2025. Critical to this process is how this support plays out on the ground through the engagement of a broad set of actors across civil society, the private sector, and local communities. And this includes many of you that are present in this webinar today. And so we're very excited to have this interactive engagement with all of you. The Climate Promise 2025 framework of support is structured around 3 key pillars. The first being ambition, supporting countries to enhance NDCs with bolder targets, and in this case, bolder energy targets to reduce emissions, increase resilience, and channel finance to critical sectors at global, national, and local levels. Acceleration is really about scaling up implementation of climate actions on the ground through the mobilizing of public, private, international, and national finance towards NDCs. Inclusivity is really the leave no one behind agenda through meaningful and long-term engagement with underrepresented groups, including women, indigenous communities, and also local communities themselves, to really be active agents of change and also contributors to the process on the ground. And so in this context, what does this all mean for energy? What do the third generation NDCs present for clean energy ambition? Looking across our portfolio of support through UNDP's Climate Promise of support to over 120 countries, we already see that 100% of all NDCs include energy-related targets or policies. And so this really provides a good basis for raising ambition in terms of elevating, for example, the SDG7 action areas within NDCs in a trackable and easy to report fashion. And so making sure that NDCs have measurable targets for electrification, clean cooking, energy efficiency, renewable energy production, and finance. Ensuring also policy coherence across NDCs, energy compacts, and as well as energy and development plans. We see in many countries that many of these plans and targets are developed and organized by different ministries and stakeholders. And so there needs to be some coherence and collaboration to understand what are these targets and how can they be effectively communicated across different groups. And then also situating energy as an important enabler of other SDGs. And so looking at the important nexus areas between energy and other systems, including health, food systems, education, and sustainable cities, just to name a few examples. And finally, aligning with cross-cutting issues such as gender, human rights, and social inclusion as part of this process, and recognizing the very important role of finance in the sector to really accelerate the clean energy transition in countries. And so with that, please feel free to reach out to me if you do have any questions on any of this. But I would now like to turn over to Guli Sabahi, Senior Advisor of Climate Finance within the NDC Partnership, to speak about this need for finance and how to leverage NDCs as documents in many ways that lay out clear investment priorities for the private sector to come in. So over to you, Guli, with this.
Thank you very much, Lulu, and thank you for setting the context so well. By way of introduction, I'm a part of the finance team at the NDC Partnership Support Unit. My work focuses on private sector engagement, which is a priority area under the NDC Partnership's finance strategy and is a key area of support we provide to our developing country members. Before joining the NDC Partnership over 2 years ago, I have spent about 20 years in private sector as a lawyer and then as a senior executive working on private sector investments in energy and other sectors in many developing countries across regions, and also helping countries better leverage those investments for local development. Now, working in climate finance, the work has come really full circle for me, where climate is being mainstreamed into development, and most of the climate finance has to come from the private sector. NDCs, as we all have been hearing, are expected now to drive real economy investments from all types of businesses and investors, large and small, international and domestic, working together with governments and partners to achieve NDC targets. Ambitious NDCs will be critical for attracting investments. Private sector engagement in NDC action at the country level and globally is instrumental. In fact, one of the key insights from the recent consultations on NDCs we have conducted with over 100 private sector stakeholders was on the importance of private sector engagement early on in the country-led NDC processes. The identification of relevant private sector stakeholders for such engagement, of course, would be different in each country's context. It would be largely informed by the country's energy sector priorities and ambition, and of course, relevant value chains. So it's important for countries and partners to assess, first of all, whether there are already existing businesses and investors in the country with ambitious climate plans who could be mobilized to enhance ambition and implementation of NDCs. It's equally important to identify private sector entities in the country who may not yet have transition plans and need clear signals and incentives to set their own ambitions. We have developed a number of tools, for countries for their NDC work. One of our recent tools for the development of NDCs 3.0 is called NDC 3.0 Navigator Tool. There are a few opportunities outlined for leveraging the private sector. I will mention 5 key points from the tool that focus on ambition raising. Number 1, adopting ambitious targets by the country will enable businesses and their investors to also act ambitiously. Integrating the highest level of ambition and adopting the outcomes of the global stocktake sends a clear signal to the private sector to adopt ambitious targets and implement robust transition plans aligned with national strategies. Number 2, including clear targets for private sector contribution. When setting sectoral targets for emission reduction and in the energy sector, setting different subsectoral priorities, it would be helpful to explicitly mention the expected contributions to reach those targets from different private sector segments, from the oil and gas industry that may be operating in the country, from the renewable energy industry, and also the end-use sectors such as transport, buildings, and other across, hard-to-abate industries. These expectations can create complementing strategies and opportunities for public and private sectors in jointly achieving the targets. The third point, working with the energy sector industry to raise ambition. Many businesses have extensive supply chains, as you know, both within and outside of countries. And working with coalition of those businesses and their investors is useful to identify ways to align and interlink business targets and priorities with national climate priorities. It's also very important to understand the perspectives that investors have on investability elements of NDCs. There are a number of papers being issued. I found one particularly useful, the institutional group, investor group on climate change, IIGCC, has recently released a 9-page outline of the perspectives of some of the largest European institutional investors on making NDCs investable. Of course, the perspectives of domestic businesses and investors should be understood as well. And countries can engage, for example, with the local networks of the UN Global Compact, which represents those domestic businesses as well as multinational businesses that have subsidiaries across the regions. Number 4, utilizing businesses for innovation and value chains, technology transfers, and economic opportunities can also help raise ambition as part of the development of those new value chains, new technological solutions, and associated economic opportunities, including local content and great jobs creation and development of new markets, new export routes, and regional economic zones. Number 5, in addition to working with the industries and coalitions, it's also useful to leverage individual businesses and investors' transition plans. Many businesses and investors have set their own transition plans. Some of them are available online. You can see that many of them are starting to set highly ambitious targets, and they're looking to invest in countries that are equally ambitious and also, of course, offer the enabling environment necessary to achieve those targets. So this interlinking and alignment between national priorities and national investment plans and strategies and private sector's transition plans and climate action plans could enable greater flows of direct investments as well as transfer of technology, knowledge, and expertise and good industry practices. So in conclusion, I just like to emphasize again the importance of ambitious NDCs for investments and the importance of private sector engagement in creating that solid base of businesses and investors who can help the country meet its targets. Together with our members and partners, NDC Partnership ready to provide support to countries as they engage with the private sector and partners in the development of NDCs 3.0. Thank you all. I'll turn back to you, Lulu.
Thank you so much. I think you make a very, very important point about how we work with the private sector. And the way we're developing national investment plans that also in many ways bring in local private sector who perhaps is not so engaged in this process. So I think with that, we will extend the conversation to a panel discussion that will be moderated by Divya Kotadel from SEforALL. Over to you, Divya, to introduce the panel and also the panelists. Over to you.
Thanks, Lulu. Hi, everyone. My name is Divya Kotadel. I work with SEforALL, as Lulu mentioned. I'm going to quickly introduce the panel. We have Yusua Christophel from Bapenas, Government of Indonesia. Deborah Lay from ECLAC, Chief of Energy and Natural Resources, and Tony Muhumuza, the Deputy Resident Representative of UNDP. We're also going to be joined by Dr. Yumkela from the Government of Sierra Leone, but he's held up in a different meeting, so he will perhaps join us a little bit later. But just to continue the conversation, like Lulu said, I'm going to start with, Yusua, I'll start with you as a government representative from Indonesia. So earlier this year, Indonesia submitted a pretty ambitious energy compact. It was presented at COP last year and formally launched in January this year. Can you give us an overview of the energy commitments that are in this compact and just the highlights of Indonesia's energy commitments?
Okay, thank you, Divya, for the question. Hi, everyone. So the Indonesia's Energy Compact is centered on 4 main objectives. The first one is to increase share of new and renewable energy mix in the Indonesia's total primary energy supply. The second one is to improve the energy intensity of the Indonesia's economy, because one of the main development agendas of Indonesia is to conduct economic transformation from our currently we are having our natural resource extraction based model of economy into a green and blue economy. So we hopefully we can reduce our energy consumption, and therefore we can reduce our energy intensity. And the third point of the compact is to reduce annual greenhouse gas emissions in the energy sector. And the fourth is increasing the current installed capacity of our solar and wind power up until 2030.
Great, thank you so much for that overview. Deborah, I'm going to move to you next. We have a significant number of compacts from the LAC region, both from governments and the private sector, and these have been both individual as well as multi-stakeholder compacts. I know you yourself have been involved with putting together quite a few of those. Can you maybe just give us an overview of the commitments from the region and what's the current scenario of energy from the LAC region?
Yes, well, good morning, everybody. Good day. Hope you're all doing well. Thank you very much for the invitation to the panel and for this question. And as you rightly say, there's a lot of activity going on in Latin America and the Caribbean, at least as seen by the number of compacts that have been submitted. So we have different categories. Some of them are just broader initiatives, like the 24/7 carbon-free that has countries like Chile, Panama, Costa Rica, and Mexico to accelerate decarbonization and electricity systems. We also have No New Coal, also joined by Panama and Chile, that is looking at eliminating coal power projects. We have one of the more relevant ones would be the renewable energies in Latin America and the Caribbean, RELAC, that looks for a 70% generation of renewable energy in approximately 14 countries of the region. And of course, some of these countries also have their own national ones. And in terms of countries, we have both from Central and South American countries, and they take a broad range from energy access issues like having 100% basic electricity services. Some focus also on reduction of use of fuel wood for cooking in line with SDG 7.1, but we also have different rates of increase in renewable energy and different energy efficiency measures, such as standards or, for example, efficient public lighting. And what we can see here is the broad range of what a just energy transition means, going like from access to renewable energy. Some countries are focusing more on electromobility, chargers, more on public transportation, or private vehicles, and some, like Bolivia, have a mix of both basic access to electricity as well as green hydrogen. So there are some countries like Bolivia and Chile that are prioritizing more research on green hydrogen and how to become exporters. And then we also, lastly, to wrap up, we have some of the private sector and other institutions like Electrobras and BNDES that are looking to decarbonize the Amazon and looking specifically at what are these feasibility studies to see how to change the diesel systems to renewable energy. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you for that, Deborah. And Tony, as you know, the representative from Nigeria, Nigeria is a pretty strategic country in terms of energy access, as well as a major economy in Africa. What is the future of the energy transition in Nigeria, and how do you think this could be relevant across Africa?
Thank you very much, Divya. Maybe also to set a little bit of context here now that you've talked about Nigeria and actually setting it within the context of Africa, maybe what I would say, given the challenge of energy access in Nigeria is, if you talk about 600, about 680 something about people having no access to energy, then Nigeria takes close to about 13% of that. And Nigeria, talking about close to about 90 million people without access to energy. So you address energy challenges in Nigeria, you're able to make a very big dent on energy poverty, both within Africa, the African context, as well as globally. Also a little bit more on this context. If you've been following on the internet, you've actually heard about the significant power shortages the country is facing during this challenging time of economic reform. We've also heard about the significant disparity between the demand for energy and the supply, as well as the capacity. The country currently can produce about 13.4 megawatts of energy. That's the capacity. But when you look at what is demanded is about 20,000. So the gap is quite big and actually growing. But that one now leaves us with the sources such as solar, which are still at a very minimal, and then the next big source of energy being diesel and petrol generating plants. So you understand when you talk about renewables, now the challenges we could actually be having. But the glimmer of hope the country has is the recent Energy Act, the Energy Act that was established by the government, which aims at decentralizing, deregulating the energy sector. Within this act, actually, we are able to see the country being able to accommodate the rights of the state government, about 36 states and the federal cities territory, which makes them about 37. To give them now power to make laws. And they also now, they are going to have more powers to establish markets for generation, transmission, as well as operation of systems. And with this new act, it's going to be quite possible for the private sector, private players to be in position to construct. They will be in position to own and also be in position to operate a mini grid. So I think this gives us a glimmer of hope if it is actually actualized in terms of bringing the private sector on board to generate, distribute, and earn from power. But now you talked about the future of energy transition. And I think before we even get there, I think it's really good to understand within the African context that the challenge, as someone mentioned earlier, it's not going to be very easy to have this transition without looking at access. In Africa, the biggest challenge is access. So when you engage with government officials and talk about energy transition, they'll actually tell you about the need for them to access energy first before you actually even talk about greening it. So, but as much as they have that challenge, you still see a lot of interest in going green despite the challenges. Now, I'll just give you an example of Nigeria. Recently, the country came up with an energy transition plan. This transition plan has a target to reach net zero by 2060. And the government was able to identify about 5 key sectors. One of them being power, the transport, the other one industry, the oil and gas sector, which is the largest emitter, as well as cooking. And these 5 coupled together, they account for more than 65% of emissions. But what will it take for the government to achieve all this? They have the ambition, but achieving it is going to be another issue when it comes to financing. The government is actually estimating the need for about $1.9 trillion if it is to achieve the net zero by 2060. But if you translate it into what is required annually, the government needs 10 billion annually to achieve that. It's not going to come from the government alone. The private sector will have a very big role to play in this transition journey. But what they're actually telling us is the positive that actually are going to come out of this, and one of them being the need, the number of jobs that this is actually going to create. It's going to create quite a number of jobs when we green. But the current conversation now we are having within the government is how we can be in position to bring in the private sector. And the good news is that the private sector has actually been longing for this policy that decentralizes decision on power, and they are beginning now to come up to see how they can actually work closely to support the government. So the ambition is there. The challenge now is a balance between going for the greening vis-a-vis being in position to enable people to access first, and then we think about greening later. That's one of the biggest challenges we have. So in the development partner community, we're a bit cautious how we try to position this. We can actually think about greening, but we do not necessarily advance greening. Much as we want greening, we usually advance the issue of energy access. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that overview. I'm going to go back to Indonesia. Yoshua, since we are talking about revising the NDCs and how the energy commitments play a role within that, can you talk through the process in Indonesia of revising the NDCs and how the collaborative process in which energy and climate commitments are incorporated within this?
Yes, Divya. So currently we are preparing our second NDC, and we expect that we can submit it by August of this year. So regarding the, let's say it's the synchronization of energy and climate goals, currently because of our own NDC, we are currently revising our national energy plan. Previously, it was enacted in 2014, so that was before the Paris Agreement. And now we're currently revising it and also put the NDC as one of the main consideration, especially to achieve net zero emission in 2060. So hopefully the new energy plan will be enacted in this year as well. And the main supporting law for the energy plan is the law on renewable energy. We hope that the law can create a conducive environment for renewable energy to grow and also to attract renewable energy investment into Indonesia.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Debbie, from your perspective, like within the ECLAC has been working with a number of countries in the region on their energy targets. But from your perspective and experience, like how would they go about ensuring alignment between their revised NDCs, so their climate goals as well as their energy commitments?
Yes, thank you for the question, Divya. So ECLAC, at least the Mexico sub-regional headquarters, have been working with the Central American Integration System, which is our version of similar to the European Union. So it has the 7 countries of Central America plus Dominican Republic. And we've been working since I think 2006 or 7 on sustainable energy strategies, one that went up to 2020. The current one goes up to 2030, and the different energy policies of the different countries are aligned with the sustainable energy strategy. That has also been approved by the 8 respective energy ministers. So the regional energy compacts that we just helped develop with the countries are based on the sustainable energy strategy, mirroring also the SDG7, and also at the request of the countries, we're developing a regional NDC. So we're calling it the regional goal. The main difference is that while the energy compacts are mirroring SDG7, the NDC is focusing on mitigation, adaptation, and losses and damages. And this is important for the region because as other countries like in Africa, we're not great emitters, so we don't carry that greater responsibility on the side of emission reductions, but the region is highly vulnerable. So this focus on adaptation and having equity and justice and inclusion embedded is very important. So much so that there is a regional declaration on climate justice, for example, and what it means for the most marginalized populations and indigenous populations. So it's looking at how energy is a means for adaptation, for example, to power early warning systems or shelters, but also that the energy infrastructure of the region is also highly vulnerable to climate impacts. And in terms of loss and damage, the importance lies in, for example, with El Nino that stretched on perpetually, hydro generation dropped to as much as 30% in some of the countries of the region. So it means that in a region that has almost 65% of share of renewable energy, 75% if we just consider Central America, having these reductions in hydroelectric increases the vulnerability of the regions, as we are net importers of fossil fuels. So then the question is, how much longer can we really rely on hydroelectricity as the main source in our generation matrix? And what do we fill that gap with? If not with natural gas, how can we start boosting other renewable energy generation sources? So we find it a good complement to work on energy compacts and this NDC, and we're trying to do the appropriate handshake. So, for example, the energy compacts were just approved by the ministers of energy, and SEforALL should be receiving them very soon, in a couple of days or a week. And the regional goal, the NDC, we're hoping it will be approved in the coming months and officially launched at the next COP in Baku. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Deborah. And yeah, we look forward to receiving those new compacts. Tony, to you, you mentioned finance is a huge challenge, or one of the challenges in implementation, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit on the financial gaps and the need for countries like Nigeria to implement their commitments, but also how are partners like UNDP supporting Nigeria's energy access and transition plans? Give us a brief overview of that.
Thank you very much, Divya. As mentioned earlier, the government has a very ambitious plan to achieve energy access, to achieve energy transition, and of course for 2060. So in our view, the 1.9 trillion is extremely heavy to realize if you do not have very strong backing both of private sector and then development partners in terms of setting the appropriate system to attract the right kind of investment both within the country and globally. But then we also think if you have the right systems in place, the right legal policy, institutional framework, that is possible. And good enough, the government is already beginning to show interest by establishing the right policy, by having that act. And now what we are currently doing with government is now to support it, to prepare the appropriate policy to accompany the act. So we've just last month, we've just come from a very highly engaging discussion with the biggest players in the country as UNDP. These are private sector players as well as the big banks, IFIs, then also the African Development Bank and others, as a way of just beginning a conversation on how we can be in position to accompany the government on this journey, using UNDP as UNDP's convening power. And some of the things you're actually talking about here, we are really resonate with what actually happened during the conversation, where the private sector says the resources are there, they have the appropriate networks, but I think what they really need is quite a number of things. One, they need assurance of stability in terms of the legal policy, institutional framework, the investment environment. They also looking for the opportunities to see that whatever they invest in is actually de-risked. They also are looking for more power at the state level to enable them, actually the private sector, to engage directly with the states and strike deals, which environment is already being provided. And during that conversation, actually the Minister for Power, who was one of the key high-level people, gave assurance to the private sector. But I think the other thing that they actually mentioned is for institutions such as UNDP, with the convening part, to be in position to bring all the partners together. So that's what we are beginning with as UNDP, and we believe, I think it's going to be in position to set the stage. So that conversation actually helped us in a number of ways. One, of course, begin the coordination. Then the second one is to be in position to gauge the private sector interests in the energy space, which actually was more of a positive nod. It really happens, and I think they are available to provide, to be part of the key players in that. But then three, it was also helping us as UNDP to think about coming up with an offer, an energy offer as UNDP country office, which already beginning to work on closely with our colleagues in the energy hub. So UNDP is establishing an energy offer with an ambition of mobilizing a sizable amount of financing, which I may not be in position to say at the moment, but to be in position to support the transition, both the energy access and energy transition. And as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to be quite cautious how we position it. Initially, we're thinking more about access, as we get it implied to have a transition, the sustainability issues. So our offer as UNDP, our energy offer is structured around three main areas. We intend to provide customized technical support to the government to be in position to implement the energy policy, including the formulation of that policy. The second one is we want to invest more in integrating digital energy solutions in the entire energy value chain, to be in position to leapfrog the country's energy systems. And then third, we are also trying to work closely with the UNCDF to design a blended financing facility. This should be in position to unlock existing finance both within the country and actually globally. So those are the three main areas, but also maybe to emphasize, we are taking advantage now of the decentralization of the energy sector to identify about 12 states, 12 of the 37 states to be in position to partner with. Some of them already have some of these resources. They just don't know how to allocate them, not provide the appropriate institutional environment for private sector to thrive. So these are some of the areas where we're really working. But just to mention, we are just beginning the conversation. This is one of the spaces at the country level that we are putting a lot of effort on as a country office. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that, and also thank you to the panelists for this overview of energy and climate commitments from different countries and different regions. I'm going to still hold you for a few more minutes. We're going to go to a poll, and then we'll come back and look at some of the questions in the chat, but also if the panelists can also give us their sort of perspectives or like just closing thoughts on this discussion, and we'll come back to each of the panelists after this poll. So I'll hand it over to Sarah to run the poll.
Yes, thank you so much. So I'm going to once again share my screen and hope this time that I click the right button. So this is a interactive poll for everyone through what Menti, and there's instructions on how to use that on this first slide. So the Menti is the software that we will be using. So it is in English, so apologies that we don't have a translation for this, but if you are able to, you can either use the QR code on this screen and go to the Menti from there, or you can also go to www.menti.com, and then in the section where it says to enter code, you can enter 23986921. And Laura, maybe you could put that in the chat as well. So the way that this works, once you are able to log in, you will see a prompt here that will ask you to answer the questions. And the first question here is, what do you see as the most significant challenges to advancing NDCs in the context of energy-related actions and priorities is how it's supposed to finish. I think the text cut off, but you are able to enter your responses, and it should be able to populate as you do that. And Divya, just let me know when you would like me to move on to the next question. Looks like finance is a very common topic that is popping up here for us. Just let me know when you'd like me to move on to the next question.
I think we can maybe 10 seconds.
10 more seconds. Okay. Great, and you can still enter them and we will be able to see them later, but we will move on to the next slide and next question, which is, what are the critical areas of energy sector support that countries need to advance their NDC revision efforts? And this is very similar, but this will prompt a word cloud rather than just responses. So you can enter your response there as. There should be also an option on your screen if you're not able to see this question to go to the next question, but hopefully it should have prompted you to go to the next question. Now, the way that this works, for those of you who have not used a word cloud in the past, is if there are common terms that are added, the larger the word appears on the screen. So it shows how many people are choosing those topics. I'll give you 10 more seconds here, and we'll move on to the next and final question. Great, lots of responses here. Thank you so much. So we will go on to the final question here, and this is a multiple choice, so you'll only be able to choose one of these. What would you consider as the most important SDG7 aligned area that should be prominently reflected in NDCs? So you can only choose one here so we can see what the audience identifies as the priority here. And give you 10 more seconds here. Okay. Great. Thank you all for doing that. You are still able to enter your responses there later if you wish to, and we will have the responses all recorded in our software. So thank you so much for taking the time to answer those questions.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And yeah, there was some interesting questions with the responses as well. And like Sarah said, you can still enter your responses if, through the questions and using the same code. We'll go to some of the questions in the chat, but I think some of them have been answered online. There's one. Sorry, there's one in French. I'm not sure I can understand that. I'll go to the last one from Raul. Can you talk about how UNDP and NDC Partnership are tackling the issue of fossil fuel subsidies? I don't know, Tony, if you want to take that one, or maybe Cooley, if you're still online.
I'm here. What's the question that was posed?
Sorry, the question is, could you say more about how UNDP and NDC Partnership are tackling the issue of fossil fuel subsidies?
It's responding on behalf of NDC Partnership. We essentially, our work is country driven. So when the requests come from countries in terms of the issues that they would like to address, as well as, fossil fuel subsidies, for instance, those would be essentially addressed by our partners. We mobilize direct partner support. I think some of the issues would relate to some of the policy changes that need to be made. Some of them may require, coordination and engagement with relevant stakeholders. So I do not have a specific examples that I could mention. But in general, that's how we mobilize our support by, through our partners. And maybe UNDP has some specific examples where they provided this type of support through the NDC partnership. Thank you.
No, nothing in particular on my side at that point, but maybe just to emphasize that of course, this discussion of fossil fuel subsidies is something that's happening in quite a number of countries. But I think we also need to see how to juggle between that as well as the macroeconomic framework, how it responds to that, as well as the socioeconomic aspects. Quite a number of countries, of course, once you remove these subsidies immediately, you tend to see the levels of poverty shooting up, because sometimes some of these subsidies, to some extent, help the poor in terms of accessing the services that they need. So I think we just need to be a little bit cautious. You cannot just remove these subsidies without thinking about the overall structure of the economy and how to be in position to respond, especially when it hurts, the removal of the subsidy, it hurts a certain segment of the population. So I think it's a wide, it requires a broader response. Nigeria is going through that transition now with the removal of subsidies and the impact on the oil prices. We've actually seen that impact. So I think we need to think quite carefully as we do that. But of course, overall, I think removing these subsidies becomes quite beneficial, just beyond the entire discussion on sustainability, because sometimes, much as the poor benefit, I think the biggest benefits tend to go to those who already have. So I think it's a balance we need to strike, but I think we need to look at it holistically rather than just doing it for the sake of addressing environmental concerns. Over to you.
Great, thank you for that. And I think maybe just in terms of like the panel, like I mentioned before, if you have any closing reflections on the topic and from your specific regions, maybe Deborah will start with you.
Sorry, you got cut. Can you repeat that?
Oh, I was just asking you if you had closing thoughts or like reflections on the discussions that we've just had,
sorry.
specifically from the region. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that as I mentioned earlier, that the just energy transition has many faces, depending on the context of each country. But something that has been highlighted continuously is that it needs to be centered on equity and justice and on the people. So like repeating as the Agenda 2030 of leaving no one behind. So, and I think it's important that we continue looking at where the SDG7, like the energy compacts and NDCs come together, because in the review that we've done of different documents, like the voluntary national reviews of the SDG, sometimes we see some energy actions that are not reflected in the NDCs or vice versa. So, and I think that is in part based because different institutions work on different reports, and sometimes there isn't that much communication between institutions. So it's important, like the approach that SICA is taking right now of working on intersectoral agendas between energy and energy, environment, agriculture, and so forth, because that's the only way to really enhance this coordination to achieve multiple goals and to highlight the different synergies. And as important as it is to highlight synergies, it also helps to identify the different trade-offs that leads to injustices, maladaptation, increased poverty, like Tony mentioned, etc. So we're on a good path. I think we still need much more to do, but we'll get there. Thank you very much.
Yeshua, I'll come to you next on your reflections. And meanwhile, I think there's some more questions in the chat, but I would encourage panelists to also, there's an option to respond online, either live or in the chat itself. So I would encourage you to do that. But Yeshua, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Olivia. So I think Indonesia is as one of the few developing countries in the G20. Of course, our objective is twofold. Besides always sustaining economic growth, decarbonization is also one of our main goals. So that for Indonesia, the challenge is twofold. And but in that, we actually see an opportunity for Indonesia, because through the energy transition, we see an opportunity for economic growth, through renewable energy development, and also for green jobs and for our own economy. And also for our energy security, because Indonesia has a lot of renewable energy potential, and we have some issues for our energy security, but we hope that by addressing our renewable energy potential, we can achieve sustained energy security for the coming future. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And lastly, Tony, in 1 minute, your reflections.
Thank you very much. Maybe just to answer an interesting question from a colleague in the chat, asking about whether we plan to support marine renewable energy in closing the energy gap. I think just to say, we as UNDP are really not leaning to any particular technology in a specific country. So we are largely technology agnostic, but we tend to respond to respective needs in the countries as they arise. So, for example, for Mauritius, for Nigeria, we see a lot of appetite in solar energy, solar technology. Also have a lot of appetite in wind. That's where we are putting a lot of our energy. But maybe just to conclude, probably my conclusion, I focus a lot mostly on the private sector. From our current engagement, we see private sector is very keen to invest in this, but we all know that private sector is always very shy and extremely cautious. So we need to invest a little bit more in trying to make sure that we reduce the caution that they have and give them the assurance that they are doing the right thing to invest. As long as we provide them the right legal policy and institutional frameworks, the private sector says they will do that. But then the other thing they actually mentioned that is very critical, that is making them very shy to invest, is lack of access to data. So they do not really have data. They don't really have evidence at country level. So I think we as the development partners and other actors can really invest in supporting data, strengthening data system. And then lastly, I think the biggest challenge the energy sector is having is coordination capacities. I think if we could invest a lot of energy now with convening power to coordinate, to know who is doing what and where the opportunities are, I think we'll be in position to make a dent. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. And thank you to all the panelists for this engaging discussion. We're going to now go to a quick presentation on the Energy Compact. I'm just going to share my screen. Sorry, I'm not able, Sarah, are you able to share the slides?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
No problem.
Sorry, Sarah, can you share the PDF version I shared this morning? You have that one?
Yeah. You hear that? Sorry, it's taking a second to load. In the meantime, if anyone has other questions, please add them in the Q&A section so that we can keep track of them. And panelists, if you have anything you would like to answer via the chat function or the Q&A function, you can do so by typing your answer there, and the answered questions will appear in a separate window. Okay. Here, this should work now. How is that?
Great, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, we can just go to the first slide.
Oops. Okay. Sorry.
Okay. Well, SDG7 is universal access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy by 2030. And as you're all aware, we are off track in meeting this target. SDG7 has a number of targets under it, and under each of these targets, we know that we are not on track to meeting them. And as Zulu mentioned before in her presentation, if we are unable to meet our 2030 targets, we're not going to be able to meet our 2050 targets, and we're going to be off track in terms of our 1.5 pathway. We can go to the next slide, Sarah. And as we are all aware, reducing emissions is critical, and the energy sector plays a really important role in ensuring that we stay on this pathway. So emissions must be reduced, and there are now solutions that exist in terms of renewable energy solutions. They also now cost-effective, economically viable solutions, and most importantly, we need to ensure that we meet these goals so that we leave no one behind. There are countries, especially in the global south, that are more vulnerable to climate change, and we need to act now in order to meet our 2030 targets so that we also get to net zero by 2050. Sorry, Sarah, did you stop sharing?
Yes, I apologize. The screen just ended. I'm sorry about that.
So against this backdrop, our current scenario and where we are now with our 2030 goals, in 2021, the energy compacts were launched as a call for action, basically inviting a range of stakeholders to come forward with their energy commitments, dealing with. You can go to the next slide, Sarah. With energy access and transition aligned with SDG7 targets, also ensuring alignment with climate and net zero goals, and also ensuring that there's development and livelihoods that are incorporated within these goals. And so the energy compacts were launched as a platform at the high level dialogues on energy to achieve a just, equitable energy transition, ensuring that we leave no one behind. Next slide, please. So since 2021, we've had close to 200 energy compacts that have been submitted. These are tracked on an annual basis. We track the commitments that come in and also progress against those commitments. What you see on the slide here is the number at the top is the high-level commitment in terms of the finance that's been committed as an aggregated number through all of the compacts. But as progress, the numbers below that, you see that we track on an annual basis. There's up to last year, 69 billion of this finance committed has already been mobilized or deployed. We are currently in the process of the 2024 reporting period, and we will have those numbers published in September during the UNGA High Level Week. Sorry, next slide, please. As an overview of the commitments, like I said, for 1.3 trillion in finances has been committed through the Energy Compact Network. There's also been commitment for about 697 million enhanced electricity access. There's millions in clean cooking, energy efficiency, and a number of related SDG impacts as well. Next slide, please. So the Energy Compact commitments have been, there are individuals that submit their compacts. So there's been national governments, subnational governments, private sector, but we also have a number of multi-stakeholder compacts. Sarah, you can move to the next slide. And one of those compacts, I think Deborah mentioned that in her remarks, is the 24/7 carbon-free energy compact. That has close to over actually 150 signatories that are committing to carbon-free and 24/7 carbon-free energy. And these signatories are comprised of governments as well as private sector who have made this commitment to 24/7 carbon-free energy, aligned with 5 key principles of this compact. This year, for the first time, we also introduced a reporting a mechanism for this compact, and we invited each of these signatories to also report against the commitments that they have made. Next slide, please. The No New Coal Compact is for national governments making this commitment to shift from coal-fired power generation, basically making this commitment to not build any more new coal power plants. And this commitment is aligned with the Paris goals, and a number of countries have made this commitment to not building new coal. Next slide, please. This is just an overview of, this is again from last year's report, where we asked the Energy Compact proponent to also report against other SDGs that have been impacted through their commitments on SDG7. So you can see from the slide, there's impacts on healthcare, on jobs created, and as well as on partnerships, and a few other SDGs as well, as you see from the figure on the right. Coming to, sorry, Sarah, next slide. Actually, you can go to the next one. Coming to the NDCs and Energy Compact commitments, as we know from like the panel discussion that we've had, there is a critical need to scale up NDCs, but this also requires, many of these NDCs have conditional commitments, and many countries require international support, including capacity building, technology transfer, financing, just to name a few of the kinds of support that's required. Energy ambitions within the current NDCs are insufficient. There's often a disconnect between energy and climate commitments, and there is this need for these for energy and climate commitments to be integrated. And so the energy compacts represent this opportunity for countries to bridge this gap between energy and climate policies, aligning their existing energy compact commitments, or if they don't yet have energy compact commitments, including them within their revised NDCs, so that there are greater synergies between energy and climate ambitions towards achieving our net zero by 2050 targets. The compacts can present this opportunity to drive action on closing energy access gaps, as well as accelerating renewable energy deployment across various regions and various countries. I think that was the end of this presentation, but we also want to take this opportunity to invite countries as well as private sector and various other stakeholders to visit the website. You can submit your own compact. Our team is happy to support in terms of walking you through the process, or just contact us if you need more information on energy compacts. And we just want to reiterate the need for action on climate and energy to be collaborative and harmonized, so that we can have greater impact. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Divya. So maybe just also to wrap up the conversation, we are kind of ahead of time because we've also had a few speakers that have been unable to join, unfortunately. But maybe I can just offer some reactions to the conversation before we kind of close up the session, and also just to thank our panelists and speakers today for the very important insights. And thank you to everybody for the responses that we've received on the poll. Quite interesting to see your reflections on what is the most urgent issue when it comes to the energy targets and NDCs and the importance of finance. And so, colleagues, I think as we approach 2030 and even 2050, I think it's quite clear that the urgency to transform the global energy system to a cleaner system is quite critical, but in a way that also closes the global energy access deficits that exist globally, particularly in key regions such as sub-Saharan Africa. And so the NDC revision cycle that we will be seeing coming up really allows us to take stock of progress and also identify the key targets when it comes to energy that need to be captured, recognizing also the importance of implementation. And so as we've discussed today, the alignment with the SDG7 priorities could be more effectively elevated in the next generation of NDCs, having clear and measurable targets when it comes to electrification, clean cooking, energy efficiency, and renewable energy production and finance. As we've heard today, having these NDCs in many ways be investment plans that speak to the private sector. We did have a comment in the chat from Guinea saying the private sector is not interested to invest. I think it's just critical to show, what are the benefits that come with a renewable energy future, and what are the specific benefits for the private sector to invest as well. And so I think the NDCs in many ways can help us really articulate this quite clearly to the private sector. I think I'd also just like to say that, fossil fuels do continue to dominate the energy mix, but renewable energy is on the rise. And we know from IRENA that today renewables do account for about 30% of total electricity generation globally, and it's continuing to grow at a rate of 6% on average. And I think what's critical, in this NDC revision process as well, is to really show the opportunities that renewables can bring to closing the energy access gap in a manner that also aligns with the economic and development priorities of countries. And this then takes me to the final point around finance. In 2024, we see that there will be about 2 trillion of investment expected towards clean energy. And this is actually the highest on record in 2024. But what we also see is that there are significant disparities in investment flows. So sub-Saharan Africa, as an example, where most of the electrification and clean cooking deficits actually exist, only accounted for 2% of global investment in the last 2 decades. And so how can we make sure that as finance is increasing and is becoming more available, that it's also available to the developing countries that need it the most? And again, how NDCs can be investment plans that speak to the private sector, because this is where a lot of the investments will come in. And then so finally, I think it's really important to stress on Divya's final presentation on the energy compacts. I would encourage everybody to take a look at the Energy Compact website. We will share the link, and maybe start to look at these as a starting point in terms of how you consider the energy-related dimensions of the NDCs, and start thinking about how to develop more trackable and easy-to-understand targets in the next revision cycle. And so I think I'll just end here, and also just say a big thank you to everybody for participating today. And feel free to follow up with us as well as we continue the conversation even beyond today's session. Sarah, over to you if there's anything else that needs to... Oh, sorry, my apologies. We also have Martin Nemetz from UNDESA, who will speak on behalf of Minoru Takada, who was supposed to provide closing remarks. So Martin, if you want to come in as well as we close, over to you.
Sarah, I think you need to give Martin access to speak.
Okay.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Go ahead, Martin, we can hear you.
Okay, now I had to rejoin the meeting portal. So yes, first of all, I would like to apologize for Minoru's absence. He was hoping to be able to join for the closing, but the meeting that he's currently attending, important board meeting, is still going on. So I'm jumping in here on his behalf. So I just wanted to note in closing that the NDCs 3.0 are of course a huge opportunity for to get things right on multiple fronts. So this includes obviously emissions reductions, adaptation, resilience, but it also includes just energy transition and moving towards closing the energy access gap. So I think we as this was also clear in the session, there's a huge overlap here, and we need to jump in and take advantage of this. So this includes governments to show leadership and commitment to a sustainable energy for all, and by taking advantage of this opportunity, the NDC 3.0. But this also includes most of us here on the call who might not be government representatives, but from international organizations, civil society, private sector, development banks, etc., that we provide the support to these governments to fulfill their role in demonstrating this leadership and letting things making things happen in their countries. And I think the energy compacts are definitely a huge, a very potent tool that can contribute to this, specifically the NDC 3.0. And as UN Energy Secretariat, we believe that we really call on all of you, if you have not yet committed an energy compact, to think about doing so, but also to those who have already committed energy compacts, to stay on the ball, to move things forward and to implement things and make these commitments happen on the ground. And with that, I just want to say a big thank you to colleagues from UNDP and SEforALL who co-hosted this session. and also to the organizers, the NDC Partnership and WRI, UNDP and GIZ. So a very rich and inspiring discussion. And thank you also to all of the participants and to all the good questions and feedback that we received in the survey that we online survey that we did during the meeting. So with that, thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much for those closing remarks. And we don't have anything remaining on our agenda at this point. So I appreciate everyone who was able to join today. Thank you so much. In terms of follow-up, this was recorded, so it will be uploaded to the NDC Partnership website and the YouTube channel. And we will also be sending a follow-up email to everyone who registered that contains the link to that recording, any slides that were shared, as well as any resources from the panelists that were mentioned. So with that, thank you very much for joining, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. Thank you so much.